Good morning, and welcome to another reading of my work. This time, the black avenging form of the Earth Mother, and the pursuits of the Sky Father as solar horseman, a comparative Indo-European typological evocation. Part 1. Demeter, Erinyes, and Poseidon. Something that I have often found rather intriguing about the Indo-European mythology is the manner in which various peoples have preserved differing perspectives upon what are quite clearly the same events, the same beings, and the same myths, yet which are recorded from different vantage points and with corresponding questions about how they should fit back together. It is rarely a case of simply saying, this tradition is the oldest, or the most comprehensive, therefore the others must be erroneous and can be safely dispensed with. Indeed, quite often the diametric opposite is true. We gain in our ability to understand the bigger, broader, and older by bringing to bear what we have learned via our delvings through the newer and more fragmentary, or if you prefer, the more succinct. The immense weight of the Hindu canon can occasionally obscure as much as it illuminates in comparison to the more straightforward scriptural canons, which have less to get lost in, even and precisely as they have less material all up. And I must stress, it is via all of these sources considered in combination that the truth is most adequately revealed, a truth which thence can radiate back out and be applicable to all the Indo-European mythic traditions, not simply this one or that one, from whence the initial observation was pendingly derived. Nowhere is this more clear than in the three occurrences of what I believe to be the same myth, which we are about to encounter, one from the Greek corpus and two from the Hindu. More specifically, Demeter Erinyes, by way of Poseidon, with additional comparative elements to be found betwixt Nemesis and Zeus, and Saranyu and Chhaya in relation to Surya, Parvati and Kali, in connection to Lord Shiva, respectively. Let's start with the Greek. Demeter Erinyes, the Greek avenger goddess of the blackened earth. There is a lesser-known theonym, aspect, and mythic occurrence for Demeter as Demeter Erinyes, the black-clad furious one who brings death and vengeance. In the mythology, the main instance cited in relation to this feature is either Poseidon or Hades. In the case of the latter, Hades' abduction of Persephone, causing Demeter's rather terrifying and deadly state, with, interestingly, a line in Diodorus Siculus, wherein it is not only Pluton but Zeus, whom she is wrathful towards, which is entirely uncoincidental, for reasons we shall shortly explore. But in the former, this is triggered in relation to Poseidon, lustfully pursuing Demeter, a situation which does not appear to have met with the goddess's approval, for she attempts to evade him via taking the form of a female horse, a mare, which may not have been the wisest choice considering Poseidon's strong association with stallions, in which form he eventually manages to catch up with her. Interestingly, for our purposes, this has close correspondence with Zeus's shape-changing pursuit of the goddess Nemesis, another rather black, wrathful, and terrifying figure, the eventual result of which is the divine progeny such as Helen, the famously beautiful figure we have identified as a solar deity, vaguely remembered by the Greeks and still worshipped as such in Sparta, and with apparent direct correspondence with the Vedic solar goddess that is a daughter of Surya, mothered by Chhaya, but more upon that some other time. And we have briefly taken a look at the specific issue in the Radiant Queen of the Heavens series. Now at some point, subsequent to this pursuit having its culmination, two things happen, one of which is that Demeter Erinyes goes to bathe in a particular notable river, in order to purify herself and shed the Erinyes form, and the other of which is that she gives birth to at least one and potentially two rather notable offspring, one of whom is prominently horse-correlated himself, that being the greatest of horses, Arion, also notably and rather significantly endowed with the power of speech. The experienced reader shall already be able to perceive at least part of where I am going with this, but let us, for now, just briefly highlight a few particular elements so as to make the elucidation of the resultant typology easier as we go through the two Hindu examples. What we have seen here is a mother goddess, an earth mother often regarded as, that is to say Demeter, winding up strongly angry, literally furious, and thus taking on a black, wrathful form of incredible lethality, in this case via the unfurling of famine across the land, that is only lifted via the ending of the furor and a ritual bathing and cleansing of the state, at which point we may fairly presume that she becomes, as the Greeks themselves put it, the bright goddess, the golden-haired, the beautiful and light. We have also seen that this goddess is linked to the sky father deific, not once, but aptly enough thrice, both in the overt sense of Hades abducting Persephone, and it should be noted that Hades' situation vis Persephone is also likely the same mythic relationship between Sky Father and Earth Mother, being retold refracted once more. This leading to Demeter's anguish, or Poseidon pursuing Demeter, but also, in the less direct sense briefly mentioned above, wherein it is not only Hades, but also Zeus against whom Demeter is said to be feeling wrathful in relation to the actions of the former. Between these two elements, the furor state and the father, are also elements of shape-changing, not only of the aforementioned black, aggressive Avenger form of the goddess, but also a particular mutual adoption of the horse shape for the purposes of the pursuit, which also helps to inform the characteristics of at least one of the resultant offspring therefrom. Now let's see if we can find a Hindu myth which aligns with these elements. And of course we can. Part 2. Surya, Saranyu, and Chhaya, the shadowy second wife of the Sky Father. The major myth to be considered is that densely interwoven constellation of wonders surrounding Surya, Saranyu, and Chhaya, all three of whom we have previously met during the course of our Sons of the Sun series inter alia. But let us re-familiarize ourselves but briefly. Surya is a word for the sun. In fact, these are cognate words in terms of ultimate Proto-Indo-European etymology. However, this is also the theonym for not one, but several Vedic gods. Indeed, there are quite an array of Vedic gods who can be referred to, in some sense, as the sun. And it is easy for this to become quite confusing, which is, as luck and fate would have it, and I am particularly here meaning both terms in their Sanskrit translations, partially why the aforementioned comparative method, making use of the other Indo-European traditions, can be so helpful to untangle things once more. My previously explicated research, in the course of the Sons of the Sun series, has shown that Surya can also be utilized to refer to the Sky Father, something which should be largely unsurprising, given the essentially solar character of Dios Pitar, right there in the name, Dios, the god of the shining, daylight sky, although he reigns also at night time, and the fundamental, life-giving foundation of the sun. And therefore, that the situation of Surya and Saranyu should probably be best understood not as referring to the Surya, that is the son of the Sky Father himself, i.e. a figure akin to the Greek Helios, the son of the High One, Hyperion, but rather as referring to the Sky Father directly, hence bringing both Manu and Yama, as well as the Asvins, into line with our reconstructive Indo-European paternity for the progenitor twins as well as the hero-helper horse twins as sons of the Sky Father, the wide shining one, Vivasvat. There is a rather fascinating piece to be written up upon the potential etymologies of Saranyu and Erinyes. However, this is not it. Suffice to say that the theonym of Saranyu effectively means swift or quick, also in the much more archaic sense of quick, as in alive, vibrant, or shifting, and would generally be thought of in relation to, I say, a swift flowing river or a wind-chased storm cloud, particularly as Saranyu can also mean exactly those: the wind, clouds, water, and even fire, although other Saranyu theonyms adduce a solar character. For example, Thauri, which means literally exactly that, in a manner similar, perhaps, to how the wife of the Sky Father often has just such a co-expressive theonym. Consider the Jew in both Juno and Jupiter, which is from the same root as Sanskrit Dios, whilst Chhaya is the shadow. Although, interestingly, with a shorter second A sound, the second term, Chhaya, I'm not pronouncing that quite accurately, becomes a word for the sun, for light, or for a nightmare, with the word in question having additional shades of meaning of a covering or an illusion, and despite these two being regarded in the course of the text themselves as somewhat separate deities if we read them literally, it is my contention, as we shall soon see, that something else is going on here. Now, in terms of the actual Hindu presentation of the relevant myth, there are several, with a brief mention of it in the Vedas, and various much more comprehensive treatments thereof preserved in the later Puranic texts. And I say that these are preservations rather than substantively innovations, due to the strength with which these concord with significance of the Greek elements of the myth, even despite these not being directly stated in the Vedic account in question. To quote the Griffith translation of the relevant Rigvedic hymnal, Arvi, Mandala 10, hymnal 17, but Yama's mother, spouse of the great Vivasvan, vanished as she was carried to her dwelling. From mortal men they hid the immortal lady, made one like her, and gave her to Vivasvan. Saranyu brought to him the Asvin brothers, and then deserted both twinned pairs of children. A variant translation or interpretation instead has the twins, as in a single pair, and also emphasizes that Saranyu is bearing the Asvins at this point, in the sense of a pregnancy. What this means, in effect, is that the wife of the wide shining one, Vivasvan, disappears and is replaced, at a point proximate to the siring and or birth of the Asvin horse twins by the Sky Father. Now, the subsequent Hindu presentation of this myth has emphasized the disappearing and replacement in a rather literal sense, asserting that Chhaya is created or otherwise brought into being by Saranyu or some unspecified others, the shadow being emanated so as to intercede between Saranyu and the burning, too intense radiancy of Surya, and enabling Saranyu to flee from her husband in horse form. However, I don't think that's quite what's being communicated here in the Vedic account. Instead, the relevant word describing the replacement of Saranyu, Savarna, can be interpreted in one of two ways. The favoured rendering in the above aforementioned translations is, of course, one who looks like that which is being replaced, Savarna, the same colour or appearance, in effect, except that is not exactly how Varna is to be used in a Vedic context, wherein it more specifically refers to the quality of something, which can, to be sure, be outwardly expressed via appearance, but quite pointedly means the interior quality of the thing being referred to. A sense still present, in somewhat archaic English expressions, like the colour of right legal defence, wherein something on the face of things appears illegal, yet is morally righteous, and therefore is not so, even despite potentially contravening black-letter law upon the subject. In other words, what I believe to be expressed by Savarna in this context is the notion of Saranyu seeming to be replaced by another, yet with this different appearing wife of the Sky Father, in fact possessing the same quality or same essence as Saranyu, something that is highly unlikely to be the result of interplay of shadow and light, as shadow and light are mutually defined as different, if not outright antithetical, albeit with one dependent upon the other, to distinguish it outright from the darkness, yet which would instead make considerably more sense as referring to this difference of appearance figure, sharing the same essence as Saranyu, because she is Saranyu herself, in a rather less recognizable form, presumably a blackened one, viz. Chhaya, and or the equine form, in which Saranyu is regarded as taking, during this incident in the Puranic texts, exactly what we see in the Greek occurrence of the myth, wherein Demeter is Erinyes, black and potentially in the form of a fury, as well as the horse shape of her escape from Poseidon, and the aforementioned unsuccessful evasion of Nemesis of Zeus in the shape of the swan inter alia, and with intriguing conceptual saliency for the other Hindu-related myth we shall be exploring later. Indeed, while the term utilized to refer to Saranyu's disappearing act in this verse, nanasa, is a perfect past tense form of the Sanskrit root nas, and means to be destroyed, to die, to disappear, or to run away, it would be tempting to see a potential pun there with nana, as in different form, as well as nana, as both a maternal term in Sanskrit, and particular means for reference to a rather highly relevant goddess. Certainly, the goddess Saranyu appears to disappear by assuming a different form and or running away. This is exactly what is occurring in the underlying Indo-European mythic typology referenced via this Vedic hymnal, with the form in question plausibly having the appearance of death, either being dead, as we see with the occasional renditions of Kali, as an old crone, or an animated corpse, or the skeletal visage of Chamunda, or being death with a capital D, which is what is communicated via the very theonym Kali, in addition to the black, of course, or in the case of Demeter Erinyes, somewhat the latter, with the additional shade of meaning of bringing about death via the desiccation and famine, which had thence ensued. There is one further point that must be made before we turn to the Puranic continuation of this mythology, to more properly fill in some of the details almost deliberately obscurated in the course of the Vedic hymnal, and that concerns the lingering question over whether the two twins is intended to mean that there are specifically two twins, as in two children of Saranyu, who are deserted, or whether there are instead two pairs of twins subject to this fate, and presumably passed to a foster mother, perhaps the one like her mentioned in the previous line. The two pairs is probably more likely, as this is what is reflected in the Greek expression of the myth, wherein Nemesis does exactly this with the egg containing the two pairs of twins, Helen and Clytemnestra, as well as Castor and Pollux, passing the egg to the assumedly mortal Queen Leda. And I say assumedly mortal because, as we have previously noted in the Radiant Queen of the Heavens series, it seems rather curious for the surprisingly generic and nondescript term wife to be her name, almost as if just such a generic substitute for a more remarkable and pointedly divine wife was being meant. Something more of a nurse or a nanny, perhaps. There is certainly some support for this in the subsequent Hindu treatments of the issue, wherein the figure who replaces Saranyu is a mortal woman, or the aforementioned mere shadow, created as but a placeholder. Although given we are also in possession of quite prominent Greek accounts wherein Zeus's sexual liaison to conceive at least half of the children in question is conducted directly with Leda, rather than via the surrogacy arranged via literal egg transplant by Nemesis, as well as significant Greek disagreement over just how many siblings were actually involved and in receipt of divine heritage. Perhaps this was a case wherein the account had already become rather confused and intricate, even Proto-Indo-European times, and was transmitted in several semi-interlinked formulations amidst both the forerunners of the Hindus and the ancient Greeks. Hence why we find mention of what should, in theory, be the other woman, the copy, the blackened shadow, that is Chhaya, being mother to Tapati and Revanta in various of the Puranic accounts, something which mirrors quite directly the role for Nemesis as mother to Helen of Troy and Demeter Erinyes as mother to Arion, and which should therefore militate against Chhaya being a separate figure, a substitute or opposite to, pale imitation, for the wife of the Sky Father. But more upon these matters in due course. To return to the main threads of our narrative, the Puranic accounts for this situation add vitally important details to our understanding, turning the incredibly threadbare account of those 2.5 lines of the Rig Veda into an actual explication of sorts of what has occurred and why. I shall not quote from them in depth, but suffice to say that Saranyu, unable to bear the intense heat and brilliance, might we say ardor, of Vivasvan, creates a shadow form, Chhaya, in order to take her place at his side, as she escapes off into the wilderness in horse form. Now this introduces further points of interest for our cross-comparative Indo-European reconstructive mythology. For during the time that Chhaya is the primary wife of Surya, several additional children are conceived. These include Shaani, a baleful archer-revenger figure, Bhadra, a fierce and somewhat unapproachable goddess of the hunt, the aforementioned Tapati, Manu, as in the progenitor ancestor of humanity, and there's some confusion as to which Manu we're actually talking about, long story, and Revanta, a horse-lord huntsman deity quite specifically conceived by his parents when they are in horse form, although with the precise maternity ascribed to a number of these figures going backward and forward between Chhaya and Saranyu, contingent upon the telling. In some cases, for example, Revanta is a son of Saranyu rather than Chhaya. Often there is an emphasis upon both the number 3 for both sets of children, 3 by Saranyu, 3 by Chhaya, something we have also seen when Castor and Pollux are joined by Helen, as the 3 divine children of Nemesis or Leda, to Zeus, or the occasional mention for triplets, with the progenitor siblings, i.e. Manu and Yama, having a third, Yami, and the rare mention for triplets, giving a sibling to Romulus and Remus, for example. Although the pattern is hardly consistent, and single births as well as twins are also represented. To this we probably add, as it happens, the brief mention in the Surya's bridal hymnal of the Rig Veda for the 2 Asvins and the Surya, that is to say the female Surya, you can see how this gets rather confusing, daughter of the sun god. More upon that elsewhere. However, I say that this represents a considerable point of interest for us, because of course the logical correlates for 2 of these siblings, Shaani and Bhadra, are Apollo and Artemis, a pair of siblings born to Leto, although with the situation complicated considerably via the fact that these 2 classical gods have in each case taken on significant elements more prominently associated with the Sky Father and the radiant Queen of the Heavens, Or we might perhaps say the Destroyer, and Diana, D being rather overlapping with the Jew in Juno and the Jew in Jupiter, Dieos once again. Nevertheless, this further helps to demonstrate that Leto and Leda are likely the same figure, and via the addition of Tapati and Helen, that Nemesis too is involved, a matter further compounded when we consider the additional attested parentage of Revanta, wherein it is Ratri, that is to say night, and with the dark and Nyx related elements quite pointedly in mind, the former particularly as applies the shadowy Chhaya or the black Demeter Erinyes, who is the mother to him. So how do we square all of this seemingly contradictory information? Well, as an old English master of mine used to say, the definition of a paradox is a seeming contradiction which, upon closer inspection, is not so. This is exactly what we see here via all of these figures, insofar as the answers have been in front of us this entire time, and involve seemingly different women or goddesses, who upon closer inspection, and particularly in light of our comparative Indo-European perspective, turn out to actually be not so different at all. Just as we would expect, as they're just appearing in different shapes, whether that of deities, and specifically the light or conventional or the dark and furious form, or of deific animals. Hence, there is no contradiction to be found in various Hindu texts describing the motherhood of Manu or Revanta to Saranyu or Chhaya, or in the case of Revanta, to Ratri. And just as there is no contradiction to be found in the various Greek texts describing the motherhood of Arion to Demeter or to Gaia, or Helen and Castor and Pollux to Nemesis or Leda, or the comparative mythology showing that the mother to Apollo and Artemis might very well be the same figure to the mother of the aforementioned horse hero helper twins, the Asvins, Castor and Pollux, and the solar princess, Helen/Tapati, despite these being ostensibly two separate, although suspiciously similarly named, figures in the Greek texts which have come down to us. Meanwhile, going the other way, this also handily helps to demonstrate that the paternity is fundamentally consistent, even despite the changing faces, the changing masks of the Sky Father involved. The figure that is Poseidon in the Greek rendering of the myth is Surya Vivasvan in the Hindu understanding. The figure that is Zeus for the Greeks is hailed as Dieos, hailed as Rudra in the Rig Veda. The wide shining Surya similarly fathers the horse twins and Tapati, especially in later Hindu accounts. And this does not at all contradict with the father of the twins being declared to be Dieos, Rudra, Zeus, and of course in relation to Hengist and Horsa, Urn. Of course, another interpretation is possible as applies the mother figure, and that is that, as we might be tempted to see in the analogy between Leda and Chhaya, and this wife mentioned in RV 10:17, that there is indeed a second, substitute or surrogate wife involved. But as I have earlier said, if this is an authentic rendering, then it is evidently a very old ambiguity in the tale which should afford it, and does little to endeavour to explain the severely mixed parentages. The severally mixed parentage is, in fact, ascribed to virtually all the children involved. In almost all instances we have but briefly looked at beforehand, the most elegant solution is also the simplest one. To take the various texts at face value, when they adjacently declare these remarks around the same essence finding different expression, form, or shape, and thence becoming confused, as involving or entailing different beings entirely, which should not of course be mistaken for reductio ad monotheism. A situation and a maxim which we could, I feel, very much extrapolate out to the broader situation of the Indo-European mythology all up. Now in part 3, which I haven't yet written, we shall look at the furor element which has hitherto been missing, as the essential bridging of the gap between the Greek accounts of this myth, the Erinyes form and aspect of Demeter, Kali relative to Parvati, the black visage of death for the Earth Mother / Sky Queen deific. And I apologise for the fact that I have not actually written or recorded this yet, but to briefly tie up some loose ends here, the recounting we mentioned towards the start of this recording, whereby Demeter Erinyes embarks in a furious black form in response to something which the Skyfather deific Poseidon had done to rather annoy her. She washes that off, the patina of blackness, to restore a white, gleaming, beautiful form. When she is done with the furor era, obviously, but in a sacred river. This matches up directly with the accounting we have of Kali, particularly Mahakali, washing off the patina of blackness in a sacred river of the Himalayas when the wrathful war form is no longer required. The name of the form which Devi Parvati takes following this washing off is called Mahagauri. Mahagauri means the great white one, the really beautiful one, whiteness and beauty being, for obvious reasons, correlated. That being because, before anybody presumes something, we are talking about the sun, the most beautiful possible thing in the sky, and as we've long detailed, Aditi has quite some saliency. As a solar goddess that is the wife of the Skyfather, Dios has the same children, attested offspring, so on and so forth. Long story, which I look forward to elaborating upon at great length in some future piece. Anyway, thank you for listening. Jai Mata Di, and great for a Sunday.